Red Bull has become the latest Formula 1 team to show off its 2020 car, which is the RB16B. It's an updated version of the car that won twice last year, but had various problems that prevented it getting closer to Mercedes overall. I'm Alex Kalinauckas, Autosport's Grand Prix editor, and I'm joined by Motorsport.com's F1 editor Jonathan Noble, Autosport's F1 reporter Luke Smith, and our technical editor Jake Boxall-Legg to go over what we learned from the Red Bull reveal today. And Jake, going to come to you first. I know you're quite annoyed that there's not a hell of a lot of technical stuff to get your teeth into today. But actually, I just wanted to start you off with a little bit of pedantry because I've read over what you filed for Autosport.com Plus and for the magazine. And I know that there's a little bit of pedantry involved. You seem quite annoyed that Red Bull isn't pretending that it's gone with a new car and giving it a B in the designation. Whereas I actually quite admire this. I think all the teams should be doing that and just putting a B after whatever they called their teams last year. Because essentially, the majority of the car is the same. So why are you particularly irritated that they haven't called it the RB17?
Oh no, I quite agree with you. I definitely think that every team should have gone for the B-spec thing rather than skipping two numbers and pretending it's two numbers in advance as Alfa Romeo did yesterday. What I'm more annoyed about, having now seen the car, is that it is not a Red Bull RB16B. It is, if anything, an RB16A. I have nothing to say about it. Every single year, there is a team that will make me absolutely furious with what they provide during launch week. And last year it was Renault providing 4 close-up images of bits of a car, and that was rage-inducing enough. But to have the audacity and the cheek to launch your apparent 2021 car and for it to just be not that is... what am I supposed to do with it? I'll talk about the brake ducts. They're a bit different. I'll talk about the floor. That's a bit different because it has to be because of the regulations. I think certainly, yeah, this is obviously the last season that we're going to get of these very, very aggressive bargeboard designs. And so this is the last year that everyone has to really push the boat out with them. But obviously that's got to be tempered with development for 2022. So you can't just say, oh, we're just going to throw everything at it and go as absolutely crazy as we possibly can with them. It's still got to work, but they're getting to the point now where they're so ridiculous now. You know, that they're indescribable at this point in time. There's just so much going on. I don't think that is ever what F1 had in mind when they brought the bargeboards back. They thought they'd probably go to 2007, 2008 kind of spec bargeboard designs, but obviously times have moved on so much, and because it's such a lucrative part of the car in making sure that the underbody works properly as it should do, there's all of these little devices that help to channel airflow outwards and around the car, and there's so much going on there now that in hindsight it does seem like a bit of a misstep when it came to the reintroduction of that size bargeboards back in 2017.
Have we got any indication that this might be what Red Bull is sort of its final floor design? Because that's obviously the big change at the rear of the car across the grid. So do you think this is the final sort of elements that we're seeing in that area, or just a hint at what's to come from Red Bull?
It's got to be a hint because it's what they ran in practice in Abu Dhabi last year, and obviously they've gone, okay, that's a vague approximation of a 2021 floor, let's stick that on. I mean, maybe that's what they end up with during the season. I don't entirely know at this point. I think everything is up for debate at this moment in time. But yeah, that's the design they've chosen to show. As you say, the brake ducts are different. That's about it.
And, you know, would you say Red Bull then is one of the worst for holding things back when it comes to showing off its initial images of its new car?
I mean, last year it was all right about it because, you know, it showed off its new nose and we all got excited about that for some reason. But this year it's just... I appreciate that there's a lot of carryover from last year, and Christian Horner did say, you know, quite a while ago that about 60% of the RB16B is carryover from 2020. So it's understandable that perhaps most of the internals have changed because Honda's got a brand new power unit for 2021, and obviously they're going to sort of keep that bubbling over until Red Bull takes that over from 2022 onwards. But I would rather have the launch pushed back, shove it out of the pit lane in testing. Then we get a look at what the car is, and then we can make our deductions based on that. But 2 pictures of last year's car is not what I had in mind from a launch.
Well, Luke, did we really expect the livery to change? I know some people got very excited on social media, but then Red Bull just appeared with what it's had for many years in quite an underwhelming, toned-down livery. I yearned for what they had at the start of the last decade, where Sebastian Vettel was winning his titles. I thought that was the best livery Red Bull have come up with. But yeah, did you ever really expect them to go anything different?
No, I don't think Red Bull were ever going to do something dramatically different. I think ever since they dropped the Infinity Purple, I believe they last ran in 2016 maybe, I think that ever since then really they've been pretty consistent with what their car design is, and we know they've had a tendency in recent years to have sort of a bit of a different livery for the initial shakedown of the car. We saw the famous camo bull a few years ago. I believe last year's car was when it had sort of the really striking red sort of vertical lines on it, which was quite striking, but then obviously never made it onto the final car. And the shakedown of the RB16B for the first time is coming tomorrow at Silverstone, and it wouldn't surprise me if that run was to be in a different livery. There's merchandise on the Red Bull website selling bum bags and caps and t-shirts and everything like this with quite a sort of a fluorescent blue design. So I think it may well be that does appear on the car that we see tomorrow, but ultimately that's not going to be what's actually racing. So I think it's just a case of Red Bull saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They've stuck with this design for a long time, and it's been working quite well for them.
Indeed. Well, John, would you say this is a familiar pattern for Red Bull at this time of year? Gives away a little bit in terms of limited images, goes to Silverstone, has it shakedown. Obviously, yeah, we don't know what they're going to do with potential shakedown livery. But is it a team that does things slightly differently? I know Ferrari this year are introducing their team and then introducing their car at a later stage. So is it an interesting bit of variation in terms of how they're revealing their car?
I think it's very typical of Red Bull, really, for a team that has, is based on an energy drinks company that's famous for mass marketing and kind of huge promotion. They're not actually a team that does masses of promotion. They've not done the glamorous launches. When we've heard, go back to the days of McLaren, did that famous Spice Girls launch at Alexandra Palace, which will probably be remembered forever as the most ostentatious launch we've seen. We've seen cars run in streets. We've seen Benetton in Venice. They had a launch one year. Red Bull always release images. They always kind of don't offer enough extra insight that would please someone like Jake for all his kind of answers, because I'm sure if Newey speaks about the car, he will be able to point out lots of differences between last year and this year and refinements, but a lot of these things are hidden underneath bodywork that's hard to tell the difference right now. So I think very typical of Red Bull. I quite actually liked the way McLaren did their launch this year, and I know some people didn't like the fact that it took so long for the program to start and then have a music section to the build up and then reveal the car. But we've got access to drivers, we've got access to technical people, we've got access to team bosses beforehand, lots to explain, lots of answers, lots of coverage. I just think it's been a bit missing today, which is why Jake's probably a bit frustrated.
Well, as I said earlier, the drivers will be speaking to the media later on this week, so we'll hope to bring you all the latest news lines coming out of Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen. But John, on Sergio Perez, we've seen a little bit released by Red Bull over the opening months of 2021 in regards to how he's gone around the factory, met the team, seen what Red Bull has to offer. What sense do you get about how he's settling into life so far at what is the biggest team he's raced for since leaving McLaren at the end of 2013?
Well, I guess he's loving it, but I think you also have to understand this is the honeymoon period that, when you sign for a big team and you have tremendous opportunity, it's all glorious at the beginning because, untold results could happen in the future. You're stepping up into big teams. It's a great big opportunity. And for someone, as mature, as intelligent and as quick as Sergio, I'm sure he's getting himself right in there. I think the key thing for these relationships and how things pan out with teams is how the early phase of the season develops, because it doesn't take long if you're not doing very well for the pressure to ramp up. Also equally doesn't take very long to instantly settle in, grab a win, grab a podium early on, and you're the next big thing. So I think we don't really fully understand how well drivers are settling in until you're 3-4 races into the season.
Indeed. Well, Luke, Max Verstappen has probably a likely Well, Luke, Max Verstappen is facing probably another year as the likely only contender really to Mercedes. I think Perez on paper definitely should be closer to him, but he's going to have a hard time when it comes to the fact that he's only got a day and a half of testing in the 2021 car to get up to speed to be on Verstappen's level immediately. If that does come out to be the case, and it is another year of just Verstappen chasing Mercedes, he shows himself again to be the great star we know him to be, but he can't get as many wins as he'd like. He's not in true title contention. At what point does that sort of boil over into frustration? And the reason I ask that is because I think we did start to see that at the end of last year. You know, when he didn't win the British Grand Prix because Red Bull had pitted him before Hamilton and Bottas had their tyre failures, it was, we got second. And the sort of the vibe was, it's good. I'm happy that we got second. I'm not annoyed that we lost out on the win. Whereas in Bahrain, the first Bahrain Grand Prix, where he finished just behind Hamilton, pressured him all race, you just got the sense that things were slipping ever so slightly and he was getting annoyed that he wasn't getting those victories. So yeah, at what point, if it is another season in 2021 as it was in 2020, does he become really frustrated about what's going on at Red Bull?
I think a lot of that will depend on just how close Red Bull is to Mercedes in the early part of the season. We know that Red Bull obviously made a great finish to the end of last year, winning in Abu Dhabi, and that really, I think, invigorated everyone in terms of media, fans, and Red Bull themselves, thinking, well, 2021 we could actually see a proper title fight on the cards if Red Bull continue this trajectory. Naturally, Mercedes were able to stop the developing their car much earlier, so theoretically they should have a nice advantage coming into the season, but it all depends really about how much downforce that's been lost under the revised rules that all the teams have been able to gain. So if Red Bull managed to make a bigger gain back, that should put them in good shape for the season. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see just how they can sort of build that momentum through the coming year. For Max, I think that if they start the season a long way off, then I think maybe he sort of will cool his frustrations a little bit. But if they are within shooting distance, if they can put on some pressure and fight for race wins, but if things just start to slip away a little bit here and there, if Perez maybe isn't quite able to be the sort of rear gunner that he's been brought in to be, and maybe sort of give something that Alex Albon wasn't giving and help put more pressure on Mercedes and maybe force them into some more mistakes, then I think there's certainly going to be some sort of pressure ramping up and maybe some frustration on Max's side. And I think it's a very interesting subplot. Obviously, we've got 2 free Mercedes seats currently for 2022. We know Max has a long-term Red Bull contract, but Christian Horner has confirmed that there is an escape clause within that, depending on Red Bull's performance. So I think it's going to be really fascinating to see just how those frustrations are kept in check.
Well, John, Luke mentioned Alex Albon in his answer there, and you and I spoke to him as part of a media roundtable that Red Bull organised over Zoom, as everything is these days. But it's interesting to hear from him sort of the first time since his demotion at the end of 2020 with Sergio Perez coming into him. How did you find him? How did you find his demeanour? What do you think you learned about Alex Albon in terms of how he's approaching his new situation?
Yeah, I think any driver in Alex's situation, it's always difficult in terms of how you deal with it, and there's often two ways that you can approach it. You can either be very upset about it, get your head down, mope around, wallow around, as Alex said, and give a list of 100 things where you felt you've been treated not very well, or as Alex has done, you kind of realise you can't change the past, you can only influence the future. You get your head down and you realise that if you want to get a seat back in Formula 1, then you need to work hard and do everything you can to do that. And I think one of the most interesting things, from Alex was just how hungry he seemed to want to get back into Formula 1. That he's not viewing it as a far off 1% chance, and he thinks there's zero opportunity. He talks about that he's hungrier than any other driver out there to be on the F1 grid in 2022. He's throwing everything at the DTM opportunity. He's throwing everything at doing the best he can for Red Bull to improve and develop the car. So he's a hungry, ambitious young man at the moment.
Indeed. Well, there's obviously been a lot of big news regarding Red Bull in the last few weeks, as it will take over the Honda engines operation from 2022 and up to 2025, when the engines will be frozen in terms of development over that period. Jake, what do you expect, or what do you hope Honda will be able to do in its final year before it leaves F1? I mean, is there much scope for development of the engines in terms of leaving one final big push? That's what Red Bull is able to carry on into the future?
There's a little bit of changes for 2021 and beyond. There's going to be a lot less focus on more exotic materials and that kind of thing. There's the transition to to sustainable fuels as well, which is going to be hugely important to get right, and that's something that Honda is going to have to work with ExxonMobil, who supplies Red Bull's fuel and oil. So there's a lot to get on top of, and when they come to the transition point at the start of 2022, when Honda palms it off onto Red Bull and Red Bull picks up the development, there needs to be as seamless a transition as possible. If they can keep the same team that's been working on it, maybe bring in, if Andy Cowell's still floating around to head up the operation, then that would be a very astute acquisition. Whether that will happen or not, everyone talks about it, but there's been sort of little news on that front at the moment. But the key thing is to keep the continuity there. Don't go for a complete overhaul in the architecture of the power unit. And above all, Honda needs to spend the last bit of time it has in Formula 1 just getting that power unit as close to Mercedes as possible, cementing that power unit's, that growth over the last few years, and ensuring that when Red Bull does pick it up, it immediately can challenge. Obviously, there is the freeze, which is really, really good news for Red Bull because, well, first of all, that's what it wanted when it suggested that it would pick up the power units, because it doesn't really have the capital to keep developing it. So that's why the continuity is important, so that any, issues that might need to be fixed down to reliability, that can be done by the same group of people. So there is a lot to consider. It's a brave new step for Red Bull. It's not gone down this path before. It has always been suggested that Red Bull does its own engines, given its prior fallout with Renault before it, but it is a brave new world, and it's just going to have to ensure that it keeps a lot of things the same, understands what it needs to do to run powertrains firmly when it comes to new engine regulations in 2025 or 2026 or whenever it's going to be. Whether it decides to go down that route itself or entice another manufacturer on board, that's what it's going to need to work on whether it can do it itself or whether it needs outside help.
And John, what is the latest news regarding Andy Cowell's future? Obviously, we know he's leaving Mercedes High Performance Powertrains at Brixworth, but it's not really been announced what his new project is going to be. But Christian Horner, I know, has suggested that he's looking at projects outside of Formula 1, which could well be a ploy on Horner's behalf. Who knows? But yeah, what do you understand is the latest regarding Andy Cowell?
There hasn't been much kind of official word. Andy's not spoken at all, I think, since he announced his departure, and Mercedes has been quite quiet about it. But I would suspect that if you were Mercedes-Benz and had arguably the best engine boffin under contract, you wouldn't allow him to go to another Formula 1 team for a set period. We know lots of work contracts have periods of not necessarily gardening leave, but that you can't move to a competitor within a set period of time. You'll find that's why a lot of F1 personnel who leave teams end up working for F1 for a set amount of time, because they're not allowed to go and work for another team. You get these lockout periods. So I would suspect that in the short term, Andy Cowell won't be in Formula 1, be pursuing something outside, may even just fancy not doing very much for a while. He's been flat out making a huge success of Mercedes HPP. Maybe time for a bit of a break, time to get away from F1, but I'm sure as soon as he's able to return to Formula 1, if he's got an interest, his phone will be off the hook. Absolutely. But Luke, just going back to the Red Bull taking over the Honda engine, I mean, how important is that for the team? What kind of a big step is that for Red Bull?
Oh, it's enormous, absolutely huge. As Jake said, it's something that's sort of been hinted at for a very, very long time. And I think throughout their sort of fallow period with Renault, Red Bull was always very adamant that their car and the chassis was absolutely fantastic, and it was purely the engine and power unit that was letting it down. And it's kind of always been, well, why didn't you just do your own power unit then? Why not just take that step? So I think the fact that they are taking on all of the Honda architecture and IP, I think that's a really big step for the next sort of 2 to 3 years. It's going to be important that Honda does keep up the development looking to 2022, and then they hand over that engine to Red Bull powertrains, and then ahead of the engine freeze, Mercedes, that everything is set in place so that Red Bull can be competitive. But I think looking more long term as well, when we do have the new power units generation come in 2025, I think that is going to be really a big sort of crossroads for Red Bull. And Christian Horner spoke about it with myself and John in a media session last week when they announced it, and he said that although they would be open to working with a new manufacturer, should anyone, say an Audi or a Porsche or someone like that, show an interest in coming into Formula One in the future, that's by no means a must for Red Bull. They don't need a works deal anymore. They could do it themselves. So the fact they are sort of building this facility on their campus at Milton Keynes, I think it's a really big step for their future. It gives them maximum flexibility moving forward. It means that they're not beholden to any manufacturer coming in, and as Christian Horner put it, they've really taken control of their own destiny now, and they're no longer, he said, they're too grown up to be a customer team to anybody, so it makes sense for them to do it themselves and be a proper works force, similar to what Mercedes or Ferrari are doing. So I think it's a very big step for them.
Well, we've again asked our social media followers to vote on how they see the 2021 season playing out for Red Bull, and I've got the results here, so I'll be looking down at those and asking you guys whether you agree with these results and these points as well. So regarding the two Red Bull drivers and which one scores more points, incidentally on both Instagram and Twitter, our Autosport followers have voted in exactly the same way. We've got 83% for Max Verstappen and 17% for Sergio Perez. Jake, do you agree with that? I mean, given how Verstappen has blown away his most recent teammates, I think that's a fairly safe bet. But Perez, as I said, on paper is a bit of an upgrade in terms of what Red Bull can expect.
Yeah, that's true, but I think it's still way too early for, as you mentioned, Perez is only going to have a day and a half in that car, and before Bahrain begins, and it's too much of a big ask to ask him to outperform Verstappen off the bat. Verstappen's got years of experience in Red Bull machinery. You've seen how difficult it is for his teammates to get even slightly close to him in that car. It's something that he has a grip of, and I think Perez can beat him on his day, but those days are going to be too few and far between to realistically overhaul Verstappen in 2021.
Well, the next question is, can Red Bull win the Constructors' Championship this year? And again, there is clear winners, although slight differences on both Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter, only 28% said yes, 72% saying no, whereas Instagram is a little bit closer, 44% yes, 56% no. Luke, I mean, I think it's going to be another year of Mercedes waltzing to an 8th title. Maybe it will be a little bit closer considering the car carryover. We just don't know what Mercedes, the way they developed differently in 2020, how that's going to change things. But do you agree with the followers that Red Bull aren't going to be winning the Constructors' Championship this year?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that it may be a bit closer. I think the fact that there is the car carryover, that definitely plays towards Red Bull's strengths, and also the fact that, as you said earlier, Sergio Perez is an upgrade on paper compared to Alex Albon. So I think just on that alone, they will be a step closer to Mercedes than they were last year. But no, I think the fact that Mercedes, they were able to stop developing last year's car so early, I think that's given them a nice long lead time coming into this year. And I really can't see anything, barring something dramatic, anything stopping them from winning an 8th consecutive title. And I think it's going to have to be another year of Red Bull really waiting and seeing on the next big regulation change if that'll be enough to bring them back into the title fight.
Well, the next question is, will Red Bull secure more or less victories this season than in 2020? It's quite an interesting question, really, because obviously it won twice and it took those victories from Mercedes, but Mercedes also gave away 2 other wins with the mistakes that Hamilton and the team made at Monza, the pit stop fiasco, and then the puncture in the Sakir Grand Prix. So really, Red Bull could have won 4 races. Obviously, various things happening in those 2 races at Monza and Bahrain meant that their drivers weren't in contention. But, considering the gap to the rest of the field, Red Bull would be expecting to pick up the wins if Mercedes throws them away. So it's just interesting to consider that. But again, it's quite overwhelming across both Twitter and Instagram, the answer to that question. On Twitter, 84% say they'll win more in 2021 than they did in 2020. In Instagram, it's 83%. And obviously on Twitter, the reverse was 16% and 17% on Instagram. John, what do you think? Do you think Red Bull will be able to win more this year than it did last year?
Yeah, I think they should be able to. I mean, I've got no doubts that Mercedes is going to remain the favourites and the pace setters. I think that we didn't see the full potential of that car towards the end of last season. They stopped development so early. Plus, I think it was got to take into account we've got more races as well this season, 23 as opposed to 17. You would suspect Red Bull won't be hampered by the early season problems that they faced at the end of beginning of last year with the aero anomalies on the RB16. So I think Red Bull will win more, but I agree with Luke. I don't think it's going to be enough to beat Mercedes.
And the next question relates to the drivers again. Is the Verstappen Perez partnership a match made in heaven or hell? On Twitter, we've got 65% heaven and 35% hell. On Instagram, again, more positive, typically 70. Instagram, more positive, typically 77% saying it will be heaven and 23% for hell. Jake, how do you see it shaking out? I mean, Sergio Perez seems to have reasonably good relationships with all of his teammates, unless you're Esteban Ocon, that's in Formula One. So, yeah, how do you see it playing out? What can be a famously tough and political environment that he's suddenly stepped into?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a very, very different environment for him. I think overall it should be a really good partnership. Perez has that experience to push Verstappen a little bit more. You know, Verstappen has had two very inexperienced teammates before him, and now there's someone coming in with all of this experience who has now won a race and has been through it all in his career. He's been with, you know, a top team probably too early in his F1 career, has fallen down and climbed back up. So Perez has had the sort of full gamut of results, and he's a very, very canny operator, and I think he'll give Verstappen a little bit more of a push than anyone else has done since Daniel Ricciardo was in the team.
Indeed. Well, the final question we asked our followers on social media is, will a Red Bull driver win a title in 2021? On Twitter, only 18% said yes. On Instagram, it was 39%, so a lot more people seeing that playing out that way on Instagram. No on Twitter was 82% and 61% on Instagram. Luke, it's a very similar question to the Constructors title question I put to you earlier, but conceivably, I do think this is unlikely, but conceivably, if there was a sort of a three-way or even four-way title fight, potentially a Red Bull driver could nick it. But just considering how dominant Mercedes was, particularly at the start of last season, and the fact they went on a different development path to Red Bull, means it's just, you know, I think they go in as the overwhelming favourites. But yeah, do you think there's a chance of a Red Bull driver winning a title this year?
No, same as the Constructors' Championship. I think it's highly, highly unlikely. I think that unless we maybe see Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas sort of nicking points off each other, and perhaps Max Verstappen's able to get a few big swings his way, then perhaps that could open things up a little bit for him. But I think that would require Red Bull to be a lot closer to Mercedes than we are perhaps anticipating. And we know that Max can outdrive a car, he can drive out of his skin and really, really perform. So I don't think there's any questions really on his side, but I just think it's going to be too much of a gap for him to realistically make up this year. So yeah, I think it's going to be another year of him waiting. He'll be the ripe old age of 23, 24 by the time we get to 2022, and he's maybe thinking about a first world title. So yeah, ideas of being the youngest ever world champion I think are long, long gone now, but still I think it's going to be an exciting season for Red Bull. I think they've got a good opportunity this year to make another step forward, but I just think the title is too much of a dream really for Verstappen or for Perez.
Well, John, Luke, JBL, thank you very much for your thoughts. But what did you make of the 2021 Red Bull? Let us know in the comments below.